and welcome to episode 506 of the Yellow Wall Pod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we're recording a quick little reaction pod after Borussia Dortmund secured Champions League football on the final match day of the Bundesliga season. For that, and not much more, joins me Lars Pollmann. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I was looking forward to how you were going to handle that, because I think it's basically ingrained in your soul to say and much more, and obviously this time it isn't, but I'm, as to be expected, I'm doing rather well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm elated. I am really delighted that Borussia Dortmund got the job done. I think we're both ready to jump off a bridge in our closest vicinity had Dortmund managed to bungle this, but they didn't. A 3-0 win in the end against Kiel. It's safe to say there were a couple of nerves during the game, but in the end, Dortmund made sure that we did not have to care about the parallel fixture that happened in Freiburg. Dortmund did take care of business. Obviously, it did help that Dortmund exercised some demons with Guirassy scoring a penalty within like 3 minutes of the game. The red card, we can debate whether it was justified or not.
It wasn't.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think with the goalkeeper basically being right there, probably shouldn't have been a red card, but whatever. Also, I think over the course of 90 minutes helped. I think in the first half it might have not helped, but you know, hard to debate. Then Sabitzer scores a deflected goal, and Mecha, I think with a very nice assist from Svensson, who has extended his contract during the week to I think 2029. Rounded it off. Dortmund are now in 4th place, and Lars Ricken after the game was full of praise for Niko Kovac, saying that this was one of the greatest coaching achievements in BVB's history. Lars, your reaction to that?
I mean, give me a break, almost. Like, I think when the German TV presenter mentioned this to Kovac, he didn't really seem to react too, I don't know, kindly is probably the wrong word, but he was almost embarrassed, I would say. I mean, it's definitely hyperbole, which is to be expected because Lars Ricken spoke literally like 3 minutes after the final whistle. He must have...
I think emotions and relief ran high.
Yeah, I think he must have beelined from the VIP stand to the interview meeting point within like 2 or 3 minutes, so emotions were running high. I'm pretty sure he doesn't actually mean Niko Kovac is now on the Mount Rushmore of Dortmund coaches alongside Ottmar Hitzfeld and Jürgen Klopp and a few others, Fischken Müllhaupt. I'm pretty sure nobody actually would make that case, but I said before we hit record, I don't want this to be like a wet blanket podcast, and I don't think there's any reason to diminish the accomplishments of the last few weeks, because quite frankly, I wouldn't have bet a single dime on Dortmund making it into the Champions League. I probably would have bet against them making it into the European competitions at all, and for them to finish 4th and give us a reasonably drama-free final match day of the season. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as Lars Ricken went, but somewhere not too distant from that, I think Niko Kovac definitely deserving a lot of praise, and also my personal apologies and maybe our apologies as a podcast, because we definitely slacked him off quite a bit when they signed him, and the proof is in the pudding, as they say. He has definitely shut me up, shut a few other people up, and that's quite fun.
Yeah, I just had a beignet, so I actually had some delicious pudding, but to stay with the metaphor, I think we need to eat some humble pie instead. But yeah, all for the good. You know, we did say prove us wrong. They did, and they did it without maybe one of the best players of the season in Nico Schlotterbeck, who injured himself in the 3-1 win against Mainz, and obviously we can talk about it. Matchday 26, they were in 11th place. They were 10 points off 4th place. And from then on, they scored 22 points from 24, which again is a mind-blowing achievement. And if we look at the run-in, Dortmund managed to score 3 goals in each game, except for the Bayern game. Like I just said, 3-1 against Mainz, 4-1 in Freiburg, 2-2 draw in Munich, and then the 3-2 win against Gladbach and the 3-2 win against Hoffenheim, which both were nervy and dramatic in their own fashion. The Wolfsburg game was probably the most chill victory we had in this run-in with that 4-0 win, and then of course the 4-2 win against Leverkusen that we discussed last week, which was many things but not straightforward. Yeah, today I think they did their homework, got the job done. It was not the most brilliant 3-0 win, but who cares in the end? Dortmund are where they are now in 4th place, and it is really important that Dortmund managed to do that. I think it raises the odds that Dortmund win a title in the next years. I don't know if I want to say significantly, but it sure does, because in terms of prestige, when you want to attract players or retain players, it's important that you play Champions League football, because it is certainly the ambition of the players within the squad to play Champions League football, but also to win titles. The extra cash, obviously, I think Sebastian Kiel talked about how Dortmund were planning with that money anyway, which they, arguably should, but nevertheless, to not have to cut losses and shrink your budget significantly, makes a big difference. So, Lars, what are your thoughts on really the advantages of playing Champions League football next season versus not doing so?
I mean, the only thing you really need to know is that this season, when Dortmund made it to the quarterfinals, which I guess is maybe one more round than can be expected basically every season, depending on the draw, obviously, they made 100 million euros and a little bit on top of that this season in the Champions League. Whereas when I looked it up for Eintracht Frankfurt, granted that was in 22 when they won the Europa League, so before the reform of the international competitions in the UEFA, but still, Frankfurt winning the Europa League made 35 odd million.
It's basically the starting money you receive when you qualify for the Champions League.
So it's like a night and day difference. Obviously, I think Sebastian Kiel kind of stopped himself a little bit, because he mentioned, as you said, that the money is basically budgeted for anyway. So it's not like they had dollar signs in their eyes the moment the final whistle blew today.
From their perspective, they didn't necessarily win extra money. It's more that they didn't lose money.
Yeah, which I mean, in terms of budgeting, ultimately is not so dissimilar. But I think what he stopped himself from saying was, how they would have reacted if they had missed out on the Champions League money, which is probably sell one more player than they would like to. I think it's pretty much nailed on, and we've basically talked about it already a few times, that Jamie Gittins is probably the cash cow, as it were, this summer. And had they finished 5th or even 6th, which would have meant the Conference League, you're probably looking at selling, let's say, Gregor Kobel as well, just because you need to make up the money you had budgeted and aren't making from the UEFA pool. So in those terms, it's definitely huge. And I think sometimes I don't like to talk about money that much, because quite frankly, most people don't really have too much of an insight into the finances of like a big football club. Neither do I. It's not something I particularly care about, to be honest. I think just from a prestige viewpoint, for a club of Dortmund size, having been in the Champions League final last season, to miss out on this competition would have been very much detrimental. Obviously, having that be the case for one season is probably not backbreaking, but who's to say that it would have stayed one season? Because, as I mentioned, when you have to sell someone you don't want to sell, who's to say that you can replace that person? So whether that's Kobel or even Girassi with his release clause, or I don't know, Schlotterbeck before his injury, that would have been the scenario we'd have had to look at. And it's obviously quite positive that that's now all in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, as we like to say in Germany, I drew the devil on the wall during the season when they signed Nuri Sahin and the slide really started to slide. I honestly thought that Dortmund might not recover from this in the medium term. I convinced myself that this could be like a downward spiral that goes on for years, and Dortmund would sort of end up in mediocrity. I think this run definitely really helps stopping that, but obviously they have to repeat that next season. The finishing run, take that momentum and all. But honestly, I think what is so great about this final run is that we actually saw a team for once, and the difference to the bad characteristics of this team throughout the season to what they've showed in the last months is really stark. And I've often said I want Dortmund to be greater than the sum of its parts, and I think Niko Kovac has managed to create a unit that has achieved that to a certain extent. So yeah, according to the form table, and maybe, I don't know, the Niko Kovac table is probably where Dortmund are in second place right now. I've heard a lot of journalists and pundits call Dortmund a team of the hour. I think it's still something to be proud of at the end of the day, even if it sounds a little wet blankety. It is not the greatest season we've ever had, but nevertheless, I am extremely happy, and I feel like the summer, at least for me emotionally, is saved a little bit. How are you feeling or taking this in emotionally, since it is only a fourth place, but I feel like we are allowed to celebrate this one a little bit.
That's the question, sort of, because they basically asked Niko Kovac, who has won the league with Bayern and won the German Cup with both Bayern and Frankfurt, whether this is akin to winning a trophy, and he kind of looked at the reporter a little bit funny, because quite obviously it isn't. It's like 8 great games, and to be honest, quite a bit of luck in terms of the other teams shitting the bed a little bit, get you into the Champions League, but it's not like it's a massive accomplishment in terms of who Dortmund are. I mean, it's damage limitation, which is basically how Kovac describes it, which I think is very much a positive thing, because the biggest danger I think a lot of fans, and I would include myself in that, have felt over the last few weeks is them thinking, oh, this is who we really are, we don't need to change too much, we just unlocked this is how we are going to play going forward. And they've fallen into that trap quite a few times over the years. I would say even like appointing Nuri Sahin probably was part of that, because he was the assistant to Edin Terzic in the second half of last season when they were much better, obviously at the Champions League run. So in those terms, I think it's very much a positive that despite Lars Ricken going a bit overboard with his praise for Kovac, there seems to be a level-headedness. I just read a few minutes ago that Gregor Kobel also said we are not going to celebrate basically salvaging our season because we are Dortmund and our standards should be higher. That all being said, from a personal perspective,
yeah, I was going to say, when I say celebrate, I mean us too. I am very glad that Niko Kovac, I think at the news conference today, also said that this is not a reason to celebrate. I think he verbatim said it that way. Maybe I misheard it, but I think something along the lines was said too.
Yeah, I got you. I mean, that was just to preface it by saying that's how they should react, but I don't want to tell fans, hey, you can't be happy that your team finally got its act together. Like, the prospect, for me personally, I think the Europa League can kind of be a cool competition, but the prospect of, which obviously looked fairly realistic a few weeks running of the Conference League and playing against, no offense, but like Białystok and teams from Cyprus, teams I've barely ever heard of in like the quarterfinals of the Conference League, and then playing these goddamn Sunday games all the time next season in the Bundesliga. That wasn't very exciting to me for obvious reasons. I think most of us enjoy like the big Champions League nights as much or more than the big Bundesliga games, because there's a special atmosphere, especially seeing as Dortmund have been so good in the Champions League over the last few years. So from a purely personal perspective, be it mine or anyone else's, I think you can definitely celebrate this, because if you can't celebrate your team reaching a goal, then like, why are you a football fan? Does everything have to be like super analytical and all that? No, it's your favorite team, and they achieved something. Whether or how that happened doesn't really matter to you as a fan, I would say.
Yeah, I was jumping through the living room a little bit, and I was celebrating this. I also, even though I think Dortmund now have qualified for Champions League like 10 seasons in a row, right?
Yep.
I still view it as an absolute privilege, because there's so many fans in the Bundesliga, or in the world for that matter, that are following teams who will rarely get to taste Champions League football, that are suffering on an entirely different level, and the privilege to play in the Champions League, to be among Europe's best teams, is something that I still really find awesome. And obviously I've seen times with Borussia Dortmund where Champions League football felt very far away, and to have this consistency and to qualify regularly for the European spots is absolutely amazing. So that fact I celebrate, and I feel like Dortmund have built some momentum. I mean, the yellow wall today was shouting Borussia Dortmund, well, der BVB ist wieder da, which means Borussia Dortmund are back again. And, I think this is a nice feeling to take into the summer break and the ensuing Club World Cup. So, yeah, Lars, I think we've almost had it. If you have any final thoughts, be my guest.
Maybe commiserations for Freiburg, because when you just mentioned, a lot of fan groups waiting desperately for their time in the Champions League, Freiburg obviously for I don't know how many minutes during the game today, 45 plus 3 or so, because Frankfurt scored in added time of the first half. They were in, and obviously Freiburg, an amazingly well-run club, likable fans. Would have liked them maybe to make it over Frankfurt from a personal perspective, because Frankfurt have kind of cornered the Europa League market in Germany at least. So maybe commiserations for them, but obviously rather us than them, I suppose.
And in the same breath, Leipzig, you all can get fucked. Anyway, with that, thank you for listening. We'll be back, I think, Wednesday? With Matthias at least, and talk a little bit more about the season, and maybe some transfer talk as well. And until then, thank you everyone out there for listening. Thank you for cheering for Borussia Dortmund, and also you, Lars, thank you for making time and coming on the show for a quickie. Goodbye.